Who are your main inspirations as an actor?
As an actor?
Anyone from Star Trek, really?
No.
Well, I'm speaking personally.
My great inspirations, I've always admired Chuck Norris.
Gentlemen, let's broaden our minds.
Are they in the proper approach pattern for today?
Negative.
Hold the weapon! Now! Charge the lightning field.
Millions of tiny maggots. Maggots? Maggots. 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 All over the floor of the post office in Leytonstone.
Maggots. Maggots.
And bits of sick. Well, welcome back to Dispatch Ajax. I'm Skip.
I am Jake.
Your ass is brass!
Skip is my buddy. But if he was your buddy first...
Fancy egg and soup, please.
I'll cut your pork pie.
Today, of course, we're going to round out our Sci-Fi Channel programming early in, let's just say Sci-Fi Channel programming.
You don't do Sci-Why? F you.
Well, this one we're okay with.
But was Sci-Fi Channel okay with it?
Can't learn that kind of thing on TV, I'm afraid.
Today we're talking about, of course, Garth Marenghi's Darkplace.
You are entering my dark place.
I hope you're uncomfortable.
This is from Garth Marenghi's official website. Garth Marenghi was born in the past, graduated from his local comprehensive, which, that's what I had to look up earlier. A comprehensive...
Oh. Mm-hmm.
A comprehensive, of course, is a secondary school for students between 11 to 16 or 11 to 18, depending on your area. It does not select its intake on the basis of academic achievement or aptitude, as opposed to a selective school. God, they are so bureaucratic with their school stuff. In England and Wales, comprehensive schools were introduced as state schools or on an experimental basis in the 1940s. Basically, they were funneling the class system, school education systems that they had developed in the 20th century. About 90% of English secondary schools are comprehensive. And according to Garth Marenghi, his is now bulldozed. He taught for 9 years at his local library reading group before becoming a full-time horror writer. He's published numerous novels of terror, too numerous to list, nay, count, over 500 short stories, and he has edited 30 anthologies of his own work, which have all achieved the Grand Master of Darkdom Award, which I'm sure he created as well. He wrote, directed, and starred in Garth Marenghi's Darkplace for the Peruvian market, which subsequently aired on Channel 4 and has not been repeated due to its radical and polemic content. He commenced work on Terror Tome, which is one of his newer books, actually, during the late 1980s, continued it on alone and unaided by editors through the 1990s and on into the early 2000s and the mid-2000s, and has now only found a publisher brave enough to unleash its chilling portents. He is an honorary fellow. I appreciate that last line, because they didn't say he's an honorary fellow of what. That's just he's an honorary fellow. That's pretty good.
Indeed. So we have Garth Marenghi, the character, but what was the show? The conceit of Garth Marenghi's Darkplace was being a once-banned TV show exhumed from the archives. It was about a hospital, its doctors, and the weird occult goings-on due to a portal from hell being under the hospital.
Do you really buy this portal to hell deal?
I wouldn't say I buy it, Liz. Let's just say I'm window shopping. And right now, there's a half-price sale on Weird.
And various and sundry elements of the occult that they must defeat on a week-to-week basis. Being reclaimed lost footage, thus they have talking heads of the stars, writer, and director popping in periodically to tell the story of the show's making. Garth Marenghi appears as himself, as well as a show within a show's Dr. Rick Douglas to provide commentary, as does Dean Lerner and actor Todd Rivers. It's all comedic parody of egotistical writers and low-budget horror tropes, blending absurdism and a deliberately inept style to satirize the worst parts of the horror genre. Now, Garth Marenghi, and by way of Rick Douglas, is played by Matthew Holness. Holness is kind of the brain behind the idea of Garth Marenghi. He was the main writer for the show. He was part of the Cambridge Footlights, which was founded in 1883. The Cambridge Footlights is a world-renowned student sketch comedy society, much like the Groundlings or the Second City.
Yep.
Yeah. It's kind of the British version of that. At the time he was there, Mitchell and Webb and John Oliver and some other people that he will work with were also there. So he was a side player in multiple alternative comedy shows. He went on to make Garth Marenghi and then went behind the scenes for a lot of his work after that. One would assume he is a legitimate horror fan, as he went on to write and direct Possum in 2018, which is a dark UK horror film.
Sean
Harris.
Sean Harris, that's right.
Who you may recognize as the bad guy from the later Mission Impossible films.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that part. I've seen him in a bunch of other stuff.
Very non-comedic, very straight horror. It was dark. I read a statistic that Sean Harris doesn't smile for a single second in the entire film. And
I saw that
98% of the film, he has a scowl. It's,
That's like every role he's ever done, so I don't know that that's really all that special.
Well, yeah. It's more like turned up to 11, really. Along with Matthew Holness, there was Richard Ayoade, who played Dean Lerner, and then Medley Thornton Reed as well.
Yes. The layers in this are fantastic.
Yes. Meta upon meta. Along with being on the show as an actor, just like his Dean Lerner character, he was the director and co-writer for the series. Ayoade is a leading voice in the comedy scene, with a slew of writing, directing, and acting credits, probably most notably writing Submarine and The Double, while being most recognizable as his character from the IT Crowd.
Yes. Don't forget, he also directed a bunch of music videos for Kasabian, Arctic Monkeys, Vampire Weekend, and the Yes.
Yeah, I believe that he is best friends with the lead singer of the Arctic Monkeys. Which is how he got him to do the soundtrack for Submarine and has done most of their videos. You also had Dr. Todd Rivers, who is played by Matt Berry.
Hell yeah.
The haughty, histrionic, and balmy baritone has become an instantly recognizable vocal talent, truly breaking out in the What We Do in the Shadows series in America. And he also did The Toast of London before that.
Which I love.
He is a style solely singular, and much of his dialogue was ADR'd in the show, leading to an even more cheesy badness inherent therein. Rounding out the cast was Alice Lowe, a thoroughly working actress with a mix of both comedy and horror. Aside from Garth, she's probably most recognizable from Sightseers and Prevenge, that she didn't only star, but wrote and directed in it, highlighting her immense talent.
Good for her. Yeah, she is completely undersung in this. Granted, in Darkplace, her being forgotten and shafted is on purpose, because of the misogynistic nature of the characters.
Yes, yeah.
Especially if you look at the tenor and tone and content of the first episode. You kind of understand what you're getting into here.
No, she played her role brilliantly. You also had bit parts for many other very popular British comedic persons, like Noel Fielding and Julian Barrett, both from The Mighty Boosh, and Stephen Merchant. They all pop up in the series.
It's almost like the British comedy community is like a small ecosystem where they all are in each other's shit.
Figuratively.
Matthew also appeared, of course, in works done by Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant. He did stuff with the Mighty Boosh. He was in an episode of The British Office. These are all interconnected. Everybody does each other's stuff. It's kind of like, seeing Will Ferrell pop up in different American comedy stuff. It's very incestuous when it comes to that stuff.
It's something that's, especially in comedy, has happened time immemorial.
I think the greatest example is from the early 80s, The Ruddles, which was a mashup between Saturday Night Live and Monty Python to lampoon the Beatles.
So the sci-fi horror spoof first aired on Channel 4 in Britain in 2004, but that wasn't the origin of Darkplace, because it began on the stage just a few years before then. Ayoade's Dean Lerner would introduce the writer's new horror production, usually to laughs from the audience. As Holness said to The Guardian years later, this writer was doing a very serious horror show and couldn't understand why audiences were laughing. He was convinced it was a nervous reaction due to the sheer terror.
He did something really, really interesting, something that a lot of people don't do, in that he kept the bit going. If I could liken it to anybody, I was trying to think of an analog in any country, any big media landscape. And the only thing I could think of was half Andy Kaufman, kind of, but more like Pee Wee Herman.
Yes, that fits better, I think.
It's very much that. It's a character that we all think is a real person, though we know it's not. But everything that they do was done through that lens in that character. And not just in like, this is my pen name or my stage name. No, he was an entire character. Earlier today, I listened to an interview that Garth Marenghi does with Mike Flanagan, which is very funny. Because, of course, eventually Garth Marenghi creates a podcast, because, of course, he does. So Matthew Holness was a big fan as a kid of Hammer horror, which we should probably do an episode on, to be honest. He was extremely young. At the age of 6, he actually approached famous Hammer star and neighbor Peter Cushing, who not only, of course, is in Star Wars and a weird non-canon Doctor Who series of movies, for his autograph. And Cushing expressed concern that the child knew too much about those movies.
Yeah.
And, he was probably right.
Yeah.
I don't know that a little kid...
You can't start too early.
Well, I don't know that a 6-year-old really gets the subtleties of the Wicker Man, but I'm not an expert, but... Holness attended Chaucer Technology School in Canterbury and went on to read English at Trinity Hall. I don't exactly know what that means. I think that means study?
Yes, it's like doing maths.
Yeah, of course.
It's their version of
reading instead of studying, that's fine. He received a Master's of Arts from Cambridge, graduating in absentia because he was on the road doing comedy. As a member of the Cambridge Footlights, he appeared in a number of shows at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe in the mid-1990s, which was like an alt-comedy showcase. He was vice president of the Footlights when David Mitchell of Mitchell and Webb fame was the president, which just backs up our claim that it's all incestuous. He first appeared on television as a cast member in the BBC Two comedy Bruiser in 2000. That's when he launched his stage career with Garth Marenghi's Fright Night with a K. Written by him and Ayoade, along with Alice Lowe. They were subsequently nominated for a Perrier Award, or maybe because it's UK, maybe it's Perrier. And that's how the whole thing burst into our reality.
Yeah. Apparently, while they were coming up with the structure and the idea of the show, they were looking at different influences. I know that Ayoade and Holness watched a lot of TV together. Apparently, T.J. Hooker was a huge influence on the structure of the show.
Of course, Shatner appears again.
Yeah. They watched a lot of Twin Peaks. The Kingdom, which is, of course, like an occult horror medical show set in a hospital, so that fits. Dark Shadows, which Holness mentioned, and the Star Trek episode City on the Edge of Forever.
Wow.
Which apparently was direct inspiration for Skipper and the Shoggoth episode.
Okay, here's the thing that baffles me about this. How do they not cite Doctor Who?
Well, they kind of do. So I know that in some interviews that I read, Doctor Who does come up, and in fact, when they were doing the pilot, which we'll get to in a bit, Doctor Who is mentioned. As you said, he was really into Hammer films growing up. He also loved pulp horror novelists, those who could like hammer these stories out super quickly, and along with that, the pomposity that often entwines itself during their discussion of their work. Now, this leads to Garth himself and who Garth, the character, was based off of. There are different sources claiming different things.
Yes.
One said that Garth is based off Guy N. Smith.
Sounds like a made-up guy, but he's not. He's real.
He was a 39 to 2020 real writer. If you look at some of the stuff that he wrote, like Night of the Crabs or The Sucking Pit or The Slime Beast, you can definitely see elements of Garth's books there.
Oh, man.
Although another person claimed that he was definitely based off of Sean Hudson, which is also, if you look at his novels, like Slugs, Spawn, Erebus, Renegades, they look exactly like Garth Marenghi covers. At least for the wardrobe and glasses, he distinctly based it off of William Friedkin.
Of course.
The director of things like The Exorcist, which you might know, and infamous Blowhard interviews.
Loves the shit talk actors.
Yep, definitely had a distinct version of how he saw himself and his work and other people's work.
Wrote a tell-all book that is really inflammatory and self-congratulatory. A little like Frank Langella's, but less rapey.
Ugh, gross. James Herbert also came up because when they were making the move to the small screen, it was a chance for both Holness and Ayoade to spoof some of these gore-soaked horror elements and also highlight the DIY aesthetic that some of these less big box office shows had at the time. Now, when they made the pilot, apparently they overplayed the seriousness, and they found when they were finished and they were watching back, it was dull and it didn't work.
I've seen a lot of the deleted scenes. It is a little dull, though some of them are very funny.
Oh, yeah?
I totally get why they cut them. I mean, that's what happens when you ad-lib that kind of shit, you know what I mean?
Right. So they went back and redid it to make it funnier, kind of like a Police Squad-esque. But Holness said they needed to pack a lot of character bits and a decent story to maintain interest, because you don't want an overlong comedy sketch, because that just doesn't work long term. It fits for the moment in short bursts, but that can't sustain over a 25-minute episode. Now, the pilot had been set in modern times, but when they reworked it to be an older, forgotten show, much like a lost Doctor Who nostalgic feel, which is what he referenced, that would feel much more cozy, the atmosphere, that would permeate the old VHS quality and the certain levels of sci-fi props, and that would make that standard of quality feel viable, as opposed to if you set it today, there'd be a much higher standard that would be necessary. But when you put it as an old lost show made decades ago, it can work for being, as cheesy as the show is, still be believable.
Especially since when you intercut it with modern day interviews with the actors looking back on the project, it's not only an easy way to do fun, funny cuts in the action of the show, to do punchlines and to do dry humor, which totally works. But it feels universal because though they're parodying these things that they grew up with, watching it even to this day, I'm like, oh, this must be a parody of Doctor Who in 70s General Hospital or St. Elsewhere, even though those were not the direct inspirations. But they work so well universally in that way that you just assume, yeah, of course, through the American lens, through stuff that we would have had more access to. And so it really works even in the American lexicon. It makes sense. It feels real and drawn from something that even we relate to, even though we would never have seen most of the shows that they actually drew their original inspiration from.
So just 6 episodes were made of Garth Marenghi's Darkplace that were crappy on purpose, but with a purpose. I don't think that Channel 4 necessarily super got it. They relegated it to a late night time slot, and the ratings weren't particularly good, as one would expect, being late night as it was. Though a second series had been planned, the network pulled the plug. As Holness reflected, I'd gone through the disappointment of having to say goodbye to it, but we always knew it would have a following.
Well, Richard Ayoade cut his chops on the IT Crowd, like we mentioned, for which he won a BAFTA award for Best Male Comedy Performance, by the way. He was president of the Footlights while he was at the University of Cambridge. He and Holness debuted the characters of Dean Lerner and Garth Marenghi at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe in 2000, and then, of course, to Garth Marenghi's Darkplace, and then Man to Man with Dean Lerner, which we have mentioned, but we will probably talk about a little bit more later. I think he's really key in the success of this show, because he ended up having a way bigger and better career than, at least internationally, than Matthew Holness. And his dedication and his work on this show, I think, really helped solidify him and that show's place in comedy history. I mean, he's relatively recognizable even in American audiences. I mean, other than a few things he's been in, I'm surprised American audiences know who he is. But he is relatively recognizable. And they definitely know his voice, which would become a staple of that character and of this show. I think it's one of the best parts. Between him and Matt Berry, you have some of the greatest voice character actors to come out of the UK in forever.
It's true. I think both of them have had multiple big-time, whether it's Star Wars or the Super Mario movies or Fallout TV show, multiple video games and whatnot. They voice act all over the place.
And they're really great at it, both of them, for completely opposite reasons.
Yeah, too true. So being on the late night time slot and being a horror spoof, it did have some fervid fans, but it just didn't quite get the push it needed to stay on the air. But I think this is probably one of the most quintessentially cult properties that's come out in the past 20, 30 years.
Oh, absolutely.
Truly underground. You know, it was kind of lots of stuff on YouTube, stuff being pirated and whatnot. So it was just through word of mouth that it spread.
This was only a few years after The Office comes out. The British really pioneered the idea of the mockumentary, especially the mockumentary series. And this, I think, tapped into something wholly new that even The Office didn't. And I feel like this was the perfect time and the perfect place for this to be situated. It really did something really interesting, but unfortunately kind of flew under the radar at the time.
Yeah.
But only for a few years.
Yeah, at the time, it just didn't do much. There were other bigger shows coming out at the same time that essentially have no cultural footprint. Like stuff like Murder City, No Angels, The Smoking Room. They had bigger ratings than Garth Marenghi's Darkplace, but I'd never heard of any of those shows.
No, I don't know any of those.
And they've left nothing. But there was a success, a cult fandom, and that spurred on a DVD and didn't have much advertising, and obviously there was like no social media or streaming, so it was essentially a death sentence for Darkplace. But the ratings were apparently high enough to allow for a spin-off show, which was Man to Man with Dean Lerner, also produced by Channel 4's film division, Film 4. Holness and Ayoade wrote that script as well. That was in 2006 that was out. At that same time, The Darkplace finally found a new home. It made its way across the pond in August of 2006. The Sci-Fi Channel picked up Garth Marenghi's Darkplace. Unfortunately, they also put it on at the worst times. So I believe when I looked it up, it originally aired, I think, at midnight, the first episode they showed.
That's about right.
Just surrounded by lackluster garbage. And then the subsequent weeks that it aired, it was on at like a 10 o'clock time slot. Really, I don't know who they're trying to capture. It didn't have repeat airings either. It was just kind of one and done for episodes, which is bizarre.
Man, nobody had any faith in the show at all. And yet it went super viral anyway. I picked it up secondhand. Somebody showed it to me, and then I showed it to other people. That's how most of the people that I know saw the show.
Yeah. It was Sci-Fi that brought it over to America, but it was its close counterpart, Cartoon Network, that its Adult Swim really brought it to prominence.
Yep.
So even though Sci-Fi brought it over, it was the Brit block of programming that aired on Fridays at midnight in 2009 that really allowed it to become a hit in America. That was Look Around You, The Mighty Boosh, The Office, and Garth Marenghi's Darkplace.
That's how I saw it.
That was like, wow, this is some new, interesting comedy, really doing something. It was paired around other things of similar interest, similar comedic style, similar comedic voices, really pushed in that way and given a slot that was able to catapult it to different types of viewers and really let it develop a fandom in America.
Yeah, and I feel like that breakthrough in America really led to though not as heralded, but for the most part, but I think well-regarded British comedy from that era, or at least the era in which that was released, that did break into America, like Brass Eye, Big Train, Mitchell and Webb, specifically that Mitchell and Webb look, that I think that maybe not have broken through as well had Cartoon Network not done that. Because that's when I started discovering all of those shows subsequently. And then it was just like direct pipeline after the underground success of Darkplace and The Mighty Boosh, sort of independently.
Yeah, I think it was the proliferation of that. I think BBC America...
True, yeah.
Really like having its own programming that they started to do in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
Getting its own channel, because in 2014, AMC Networks acquired almost 50% stake in the network and really kind of gave it slots to show in the U.S. But it's one of those things that, as Stephen Merchant said, who played one of the bigger comedic voices in that British comedic scene, and he played a chef in the Hell Hath Fury episode. That's the misogynistic Liz episode where she gets telekinesis.
Hell Hath Fury was the first episode where I was really into it.
Oh, it could have been. But as Stephen Merchant said, I don't think it ever really got the plaudits and attention that it deserved at the time. But he says, I get a tweet or Instagram message about it almost every day. People are still discovering that show.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And Holness told the Scene magazine in 2023, I'm quite pleased because most of the stuff I love has always been cult. I think that the mechanics of cult fandom are sort of in Darkplace anyway. It's kind of a show about cult TV and about cult fandom and cult books. So I feel it was destined to be that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's a bad show done amazingly well, with a mile-a-minute details of ineptitude, all while slammed against the recontextualization of the meta-narrative, a hack writer beefing his own ego and importance through an illusion of achieving next-level, game-changing brilliance in this TV show that was awful from the get-go. It's depth beyond pastiche. The show within a show within a show, parodying horror and medical shows while delving into the mistaken geniuses who falsely believe themselves statues of grandeur. It works because of the sincerity, the layered and attentive writing and jokes, and the parodying love of the genre that the people making this know so well.
Yeah.
It's just so much fun. And every time you watch it, there's such detail and layer that you just get something out of it new every time.
Every time. The thing that is fascinating about, to go on some of the comments I was making earlier, Stephen King is so present in this, and yet not an inspiration for it, that I feel like there's like a truth to it that they don't even intend, but is so there. It's very, very, very much about Stephen King, and yet not. And the way that we, as Americans at least, we project that on it. Okay, yeah, I mean, I get it. He's Stephen King. He's not, but Stephen King totally fits into this, at least partially into this. With the output, the way that Stephen King used to put himself into everything, his own ego, the coke-fueled, maniacal way that he would write and then eventually direct his own work during the 80s, 70s, and 80s. There is such a Stephen King vibe here that you can't not see it. When I watch this, I'm like, okay, this is obviously a mashup of like Stephen King and Doctor Who. It's not, but it rings so true in these genres that you're like, how could you not see that? You know what I mean? It's so blatant and so obvious and so expertly executed in its jump cuts, its bad editing, its dubbed over dialogue, the concepts, the formats. You can almost layer this over all Western pop culture, cult pop culture during this era, and you can make connections. And it works on so many levels that you totally get it. And I think it inspired a lot of other shows that would come out later. I think Rick and Morty can almost directly derive its entire thing from this.
I think Darkplace is deeper than Rick and Morty in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And Rick and Morty, they're pulling from so many strings of pop culture. But definitely I think Darkplace is one of those.
Yeah, and Rick and Morty sort of was doomed to become a parody of itself at some point, based on what it's lampooning and things like that. So I think maybe thankfully Darkplace didn't go on very long. Otherwise it would have been its own joke and would have died a not loved property. The initial premise for it, that's what I love so much about it, is that it is taking from very specific things that aren't American, that most Americans don't know, but we still identify with it. Because, like, I don't know, like, I could see taking stuff from Misfits of Science or Star Trek or a lot of other American properties that you see. Think of like, the schlocky stuff from the 70s and 80s that we watch. I totally see those shows in this show. I think it's relatively universal for its time and its place, and I think it came out at the exact time that it was supposed to. Not popular, but once it went underground and sort of became viral, I think it really rang true with a lot of people, and that's why it still has staying power.
Continue.
Well, in that sense, I thought it'd be fun to go down some of the fun Garth Marenghi rabbit holes here. The Guardian interviewed Garth Marenghi, not Matthew Holness, and here's some quotes from that I thought were funny. This is from an interview by Rich Pelly about 3 years ago. Because Holness is still doing live tours and writing 3 books and a 4th one on the way. Well, it's like 2 and then a novella. I was listening to them on Audible earlier today because I had a bunch of Audible credits built up that I didn't realize. I bought all of the books that Garth Marenghi has written. He's not playing. Garth Marenghi's Terror Time. Apparently it's been 30 years in the making. How come it took so long? In brackets, wiping antibacterial gel onto his hands. The nature of time has been the main issue. Seconds and minutes quickly form themselves into hours, transmuting by degrees into days, weeks, months, and ultimately years. Before you know it, decades have elapsed. The essential issue was the ever-passing of time between the commencement and conclusionment of my task. Would it have been quicker had you bothered to learn how to type with more than 2 fingers? Quote, writing balls to the walls horror is extremely physical. Typing with more than 2 fingers is counterproductive for any horror writer. You need to concentrate your strength on 2 fingers alone. I get quite hard when I write, so the best way to channel the energy is by banging, bang, bang, bang. If you type with your hands dancing all over the keyboard, you're essentially rubbing without release. It's far more potent a jab. It goes on to say, what's your writing process? Get up, eat, consider the news, reject it, the news, not my breakfast, lunch, nap, have a hot chocolate, then I'm hard at it for a solid hour or 2 before either Pointless or Tipping Point, which I think are British news magazine shows. Is your lead character, horror novelist Nick Steen, based on you at all? I'd say I'm less of a deviant than Nick Steen. In one of the stories, Terror Tome is a triumvirate of 3 mini-stories that form one epic portent. He develops the questionable psychosexual relationship with his typewriter. I've only done it once with a typewriter, and that was for research for this book. I listened to at least 2 hours of Terror Tome this morning on Audible. The whole book is about him fucking this typewriter. It becomes conscious and some sort of weird Lovecraftian old god's mind thing that wants to drag him into another realm, and it definitely fucks him a bunch.
It feels very Naked Lunchy.
One time he refuses the typewriter, so it turns into this Hellraiser thing where it shoots out hooks and chains and bounds him down and then rapes him. I mean, the thing about Matthew Holness is he's going for it. This isn't just surface, 6 episodes and this thing. No. This has been going for over 20 years. And it's intricate. It has a bunch of iterations and a bunch of versions, and the lore still continues. I'd also like to mention that in 2025, Garth Marenghi launched a podcast, because of course he did, called Garth Marenghi's Skull Flusher.
Okay.
And in the first episode, where he interviews, quote, terror titans, which means other horror writers, and his first interview, he interviews horror director Mike Flanagan. If you don't know who Mike Flanagan is, he actually is relatively prolific. He did films like Hush and the Ouija prequel that people seem to like, but also Midnight Mass, Fall of the House of Usher,
Haunting of Hill House.
Yeah, Hill House, obviously.
Dr. Sleep. Gerald's Game.
Gerald's Game. I like and respect Mike Flanagan. I just don't like Stephen King, so it's like hard for me to like get on board with that. But he's a prolific horror guy, and also landed a wife that he is definitely punching over his weight to land, if you know who she is.
About to find out.
She's in Hush.
Oh, okay.
They wrote that together.
Yeah. I mean, If you said Mike Flanagan was a 40-year-old Wisconsin programmer for an agricultural firm, he does the books, and he's prolific in mini golf on the weekends. Not a suave Fabio-looking gentleman here.
No, he reminds me of that other guy in What We Do in the Shadows. The energy vampire?
Oh, yeah. I think that guy might be more attractive.
Oh. Funny enough, interesting interstitial, Jonah Ray.
This next guest is someone that I ran into at the Saturn Awards, which is a sci-fi genre award show that happens every year. I was presenting at it with Alex Winter, and a guy runs up to me and he goes, oh wow, you're Jonah Ray. And this guy was wearing a Garth Marenghi's Darkplace shirt, and like over that he was wearing a button-up shirt that was open that was actually from this old movie theater called the ArcLight Theater, which I used to work at. It was a shirt that I used to wear when I worked there. And I was like, oh my God, you're Mike Flanagan. And he was like, I'm a big fan of yours. I was like, I'm a huge fan of yours.
This is the kind of nerd underground shit that we're dealing with here. And I thought it would be fun to go down some fun highlights of Garth Marenghi's bibliography, his starting with his short stories. His first one being Garth Sea Dog, Car Hit Dog, Garth Poke Dog, Stakeout, Gobble Gobble, The Streaming Face, some of his early novels, Hives, The Itching, Sunburner, The Shingler, Night of the X-Men, but spelled like eczema, ECZERM, X-Men 2, Dermodisis, Rosaceous Baby, The Swelling, The Burning, The Flaking, The Crusting, A Scab in the Dark, parentheses, Scabman, Scabman 2, Return of the Scabman, Scabman 3, No Pickin', with an apostrophe, Psychopsoriasis, in parentheses, The Bleeder, Psychoriasis 2, The Bleeder 2, Psychoriasis 3, Revenge of the Fleshheads, in parentheses, aka Bleeder versus Scabman. And then some of his bigger novels, Afterbirth, Eyesore, The Ooze 2, Return of the Ooze, which is spelled O-U-Z-Z-E, and then Ooze 2, not The Ooze, but Ooze 2, Squid Rising, Black Fang, Quivers, Crab with 2 exclamation marks, Bitch Killer, Flay Bell's Sting, Are You Glistening, i.e., having just been flayed, Brain Jerk, Wretch, The Premonitioner, which is funny, Tomb Without a View, Bitch Finder General, Night of the Haddock, Haddock 2, More Killer Haddock, Haddock 5, The Haddocking. These are all things that he's actually mentioned out loud. And then Afternoon of the Haddock. Those are some of my favorites. Not to mention The Krilling, then The Kriller Killer, and then Killer Kriller. And then The Krills Have Eyes. And then Locust Rex, which I'm pretty sure they do in the first episode of Man to Man, where he's fighting the giant killer wasps.
Oh, yeah.
Not to mention his collections, A Little Bite of What You Fancy, Dead Center, The Oeuvre, which they do show in some of the online stuff. It's a book that is, if you laid it down, it would be like 6.5 foot tall. And so then they sell you this thing where you can put it on your wall.
Yeah.
And add to it as new books come out.
Yeah. Classic. The pompousness of referring to your work as your oeuvre.
But he hates the Scottish, though.
Remember, he says he doesn't hate the Scotch. He's not racist.
I'll just sum it up with a quote from Garth Marenghi from The Guardian.
Okay.
Quote, "Many writers cite me as an influence, and I will be suing them all." That's pretty good.
Tremendous.
If you haven't seen Garth Marenghi, do yourself a favor and at least just watch Darkplace. It's a fantastic little 6-episode jaunt. Episode's like 22 minutes long. Got a bunch of people you'd recognize. It's extremely funny. It'll somehow ring true to you even if you've never seen any of the shows that they're lampooning or parodying. Matthew Berry alone has a great musical number that will stick in your mind forever. It's an absolute delight, especially if you happen to be a Doctor Who fan. And also, I was thinking this earlier. There has to be something in the collective unconscious, or like the zeitgeist that was going on at this time, because this comes out in 2004. Doctor Who was rebooted in 2005. While not directly related, obviously, in any way, shape, or form, I feel like this has to be something that was in the zeitgeist. The people of a certain age recalling these things from the past, whether they saw them firsthand or they saw them secondhand or their dad showed them or whatever. There was this thing in culture at that time that really harkened back to the pure innocence of the schlocky sci-fi of the past. Through the 90s and the early to mid 2000s, especially, there was this tendency to reboot old properties that were considered kind of schlocky into serious versions, like the Mod Squad and Mission Impossible, things like that. And I feel like the fact that these came out a year apart, and then right after that Dean Lerner comes out with his show, I feel like there was something going on then that we all kind of embraced the irony. Certain people became a certain age and started watching this stuff. I don't think that's coincidental. Doctor Who, by the time you get to the 50th anniversary, was literally the biggest show in the world. There must have been something in the air at that point.
I think you're right on there. I do think it was part of a generational thing, going back to what you loved as a kid, doing it bigger and better, or, really doubling down on the silliness of the whole thing.
And without things like Garth Marenghi, I don't think you'd have a lot of stuff that came out on Adult Swim later. I think there's a lot of parody stuff that wouldn't have happened. I think it really helped set the stage for that and open this avenue for lampooning the ridiculousness of that era of television while still paying homage to it at the same time. And I think that's a big part of it. It's not cynical. It's poking fun while being reverential, and that's different than being cynical. And I think that's one of the things that this show really pioneers.
Yeah, and there's a sincerity to the whole thing.
Absolutely. Even though it's tongue-in-cheek comedy and poking fun, it is still, you're right, sincere. Yeah.
Yeah. And having the layer upon layer. Comedians pretending to be writers, directors, pretending to be actors in the show, and then discussing those elements outside of the show, but within the other show.
Yes. The layers upon layers is brilliant. It's so funny. There's only 6 episodes, but I could watch them all the time. I mean, they're still very funny. I think it's one of the best things Sci-Fi Channel ever put on, to be honest. It's like that and Battlestar Galactica are probably my top 2.
Yeah. Speaking of this is the end of our looking at shows on the Sci-Fi Channel, what they meant when they came out, how they represented what was happening with the Sci-Fi Channel in and of itself throughout its creation, maturation, and decline. And I think that's a pinpoint for what Sci-Fi Channel was doing at the time. Again, this is the early 2000s, right? So
2006 is when they put it out.
Yes. So about this time, in the 2000s, they started trying to do some more original programming, some new things. This is when they started to do a lot of the investigational shows and some of the reality stuff. You get investigations. 2000s, you get Joe Rogan questions. This was long before he had the podcast. You get crossing over, the psychic who is reading the audience's dead relatives. In 2004, you get Ghost Hunters.
Yep.
Which would go on to last forever and have so many spin-off shows. They're trying to get stars along with some injection of new ideas. So you get Dan Aykroyd's failed and unmade supernatural talk show, which could probably be an episode in and of itself if it had actually come out. The time that most people turned against sci-fi was in 2003 when they canceled Farscape. This was a time when sci-fi truly didn't seem to care about its hardcore fans. The ratings and the cost given as reasons for the cancellation came across quite bad, especially with some of the comments from the higher-ups at Sci-Fi. Bonnie Hammer herself said if only fans had watched, then maybe they would have kept the show going. That was a horrible thing to say, really cut fans deeply, and, being one of the most popular and fun shows on Sci-Fi Channel, one of the best things they ever did, their cancellation and how the Sci-Fi saw it really alienated a lot of fans. If you get into the details of Farscape, which someday we'll do a Farscape episode, it wasn't as much their fault. But since it was shrouded in such mystery and the way it was explained from the higher-ups at Sci-Fi, it really left a sour taste in a lot of fans' mouth. And Stargate was from 2002 to 2004, which was essentially, that's when Sci-Fi became the Stargate Channel. Now, this is before Battlestar Galactica took over, but there were 5 seasons of Stargate on Showtime before moving to Sci-Fi, and this is much more military sci-fi, so as opposed to, Star Trek, let's meet aliens, let's talk through our differences, let's resolve, push forward to a new understanding of science fiction and getting along. Stargate was, let's have guns, let's constantly be shooting at everything all the time.
There are aliens possessing our people and we don't know who they are. This paranoid, militaristic bullshit.
I wouldn't say it was brain dead, but it was definitely, for me, a lower tier of thought being put into a sci-fi show. But it did super well. People loved it.
2 spinoffs.
I think a lot of people, tons of spinoffs. Eventually, after Farscape ended, it took Ben Browder and Claudia Black, which I think really also put salt in the Farscape fans' wound. They had Stargate Atlantis up until 2009, and then Stargate Universe began in 2009 and lasted 2 years.
They also absorbed Colm Meaney from Star Trek and what's-her-name played T'Pol in Enterprise as well into Stargate Atlantis. And then Stargate Universe had Richard Carlisle, which is crazy and weird. Or Robert Carlisle, I'm sorry.
Yeah. It was the Stargate channel there for a while. At least until perhaps one of its best things came on. That would have been Battlestar Galactica. 2004, co-financed by Sky TV, which allowed it to come on to the Sci-Fi Channel with not putting as much money into it, which I think helped get it made and put on there. And it was by far their best programming. And even though it premiered days before in the UK on Sky, this was pre-social media and widespread use of BitTorrent. And it was so good that no one was really willing to pirate lower quality copies. You just wait and see it on your TVs. Something that just wouldn't happen nowadays.
That's right.
Battlestar was by far its best show and probably, in some ways, the peak of the Sci-Fi Network.
Even though that's when it was starting to collapse. When it was just showing Blood Surf.
Well, so along with Battlestar, in the 2000s, they also try to put money into miniseries, a way to not shell out as much for a long ongoing thing, try to condense the quality into more event programming. The biggest one being Steven Spielberg's Taken, which we spoke about at the beginning of our sci-fi primer bit, but also Battlestar Galactica. That's how they premiered the show with a 2-hour premiere, and then let's see if this does well. Later you have Caprica as a series spin-off thing. Similar was Farscape's Peacekeeper Wars. When they killed Farscape without an ending, they ended up doing a mini-series to try to throw a bone to the fans and condense what would have been the last season into a few hours into a mini-series. Put that out there. But you also had stuff like Earthsea, Tin Man, The Phantom, which was another failed comic book adaptation. But also you had Dune and Children of Dune, which did super well. They got some Emmys for those. Put a pin in those if you're a Dune fan.
Yeah.
Because we will be coming back to those in the future.
There's something else I thought they did.
Oh, I'm sure they did a bunch of stuff. I just can't name everything, and I'm not going to try.
No, that's fair.
This is covering the gist of what Sci-Fi was doing in its latter half. Now, again, as you had spoken before, in the late 90s, they started making movies. Now, some of those would be stuff that other production companies had made, and they would bring over, but they also had sci-fi originals that they would invest in, do the production, do the distribution of themselves.
As cheaply as possible.
Yes, as cheaply as possible. It really ramped up in the 2000s with these really poor sci-fi originals. But you had some decent ones. A Mansquito, per se.
I knew you were going to go with Mansquito.
I say tongue-in-cheek. Their best one was probably Dog Soldiers.
Oh, yeah. No, not Neil.
Neil Marshall. That's who you're...
Neil Marshall.
Yeah. He did do some Game of Thrones. You also might recognize The Descent.
His best movie.
It's one of the better horror films to come out in the 2000s, I would say.
But the British version, don't watch the American version, it sucks. And the sequel, sucks just as equally as bad.
Yeah. But them putting out these things, doubling down on the worst elements of Sharktopus, and then Sharktopus 2, The Dead Reckoning, and Sharktopus versus Gatorbot. It became just schlock. and it gave them a poor representation of what the channel was and could be.
Mm-hmm.
Also, you get a lot of would have been, could have been, once upon a time actors from things in the past that were shoved into these. A lot of time it wasn't much about the money, but it was about these shows were still popular in European countries. So they were, maybe Dean Cain shows up in one of these sci-fi features. That's because Adventures of Lois and Clark is doing well in Bulgaria. So they can go shoot in Bulgaria, get some money from there, and still market this to other European markets where some of these stars are still stars. You would get that a lot with no-name or lower-tier actors in these features.
Yeah, you know what? I think the original sin in here is it was sort of originally obviously paired with the USA Network. You know, the same parent company owned USA and Sci-Fi Channel. And if you remember, before the Sci-Fi Channel got big, USA was doing the same kind of thing, but with action, where it was like already at the tail end of the big action thing from the 80s. And so they started doing TV shows and made-for-TV movies that were USA originals that were basically the same thing that the Sci-Fi Channel would go on to do, but with action stars. And so you can see the sort of like corporate mindset that was going into the making of these things. It didn't...
Yeah. It's cheap, low-rent fodder.
Fair.
You know, it's content that they think will do well enough, but when you don't put any effort in and people just turn on your channel and see this stuff, they're not seeing Star Trek Next Generation, they're not seeing Battlestar Galactica. They're coming on to see what's on this channel, and it's Bruce Boxleitner fighting a robot invasion. But 1995 graphics, a portable script, the dialogue's awful, the acting's bad, and it's set in some Middle European no-name set. It just comes across poorly, and they're not going to come back to your channel unless you can give them something else that maybe is a little more popular at the time. Maybe that might be reality TV, because in the 2000s, reality TV really started taking over the Sci-Fi Network. You had Chase, CHA $E. This was an adaptation of the Japanese Run for Money, what they labeled as the first live-action video game where people would run away from quote-unquote hunters for money. That was on there. It did decently well, but I would not say it was high-quality programming. Similar to the Estate of Panic, possible culmination of the failed Disney project that Sci-Fi worked on at its inception. But essentially, like, people would come into a spooky mansion and survive the scares, as it were. You also said, who wants to be a superhero? Let's crank Stanley out there.
Wind him up and stand him in front of a camera.
Yep, and the people that would win this game show would then get small bit parts in some of the sci-fi made-for-TV features that would come on later. Great. Just what we always wanted. Scare tactics might have been their biggest one, but this was low-quality jump scares, sometimes very mean-spirited.
Yeah, I hated that show.
Hosted by, a B to C level actors.
Tracy Morgan at one point?
I think Tracy Morgan ended the run. I believe there was a Baldwin on there for a bit.
I wouldn't be surprised.
And I think there was maybe a 90210 alum who did one.
Would not be surprised at that either.
Also at this time, another big domino that fell in a lot of people's minds against the Sci-Fi Network was the inclusion of professional wrestling. Not only does it have the problem of being professional wrestling, seen as one of the lowest forms of art by a lot of American viewers, but in 2006, it was very much not sci-fi. So why is it on the Sci-Fi Network? Well, the reason for this is because Bonnie Hammer, which we spoke about previously, was the president of Sci-Fi, USA and Bravo. And in 2005, when WWE's Raw came back to USA, she would let ECW go on any channel, but not on the USA. And so it was either Bravo, which is essentially for women at the time, or ECW, or Sci-Fi Network, sorry. So on Sci-Fi it went. And of course, on the first episode of the show, the ECW, which was run at this time by WWE, decided to troll the fans of the Sci-Fi Network and put on a new wrestler called The Zombie, who just said, yeah, cool.
Great.
Good move.
Totally get it, don't you guys?
Now the ECW fans hate you, and the Sci-Fi Network fans hate you. Cool. You're really touching all your bases there.
Nailing it. You can't do the heel thing in real life.
Yeah. Well, you can try. I mean, Vince certainly puts the work in.
He sure does, and I'm sure he'll be in prison for it later.
Well, no, that's never going to happen. Come on. He's in bed with Trump, so I don't think
That's true.
The justice system will never touch Vince McMahon. It hasn't for all these decades, and it never will.
Considering he's a rapist and a drug pusher and a human trafficker.
Most likely covered up at least one murder, if not more.
Definitely at least one.
Yeah, nothing's ever going to happen to him or his family. Yay, the world is great. So in 2000, Vivendi owned parts of Universal that Stiller, who we talked about, the wonderkind who made the made-for-TV movie, the parts that he didn't own, and in 2001 purchased the USA Entertainment assets and then made Diller the head. But in 2002, they suffered massive losses, and by 2004, 80% of Universal was sold to GE that then created NBC Universal. At this point in time, Bonnie Hammer was made president, and in 2008, made president of USA Production, and David Howe was made Sci-Fi president. Now, David Howe had worked for the BBC, and he was part of a new global brand strategy to make Sci-Fi Network mainstream. So in 2008, the Sci-Fi Network changed its name one last time into SYFY, which I think for many people truly was the nail in the coffin for respectability and for acceptance of the Sci-Fi Network as a home for its desired entertainment.
But boy, they plugged the shit out of it.
They certainly did.
The swag bags at Comic-Con that year were insane.
But again, it was icing on a poisonous cake.
A urinal cake.
A urinal cake. Perfect. The programming that they were making was generally not super well received. You had a lot of reality programming. You had a lot of bad movies. By this point, a lot of like your best shows were over. Farscape was gone. Battlestar was ending. You were just not were a place for the fans that you said that you loved so much, but from the get-go, you never really liked.
Yep.
And since 2008, since the name change, it's pretty much been downhill up until the point now where sci-fi's almost no more. There's not much on sci-fi. There's not a reason to go watch it. If you look at the programming, see what we have currently on the Sci-Fi Network. Today, as we are recording, we have paid programming, Harry Potter, Goblet of Fire, Harry Potter, Order of Phoenix, Harry Potter, Half-Blood Prince, Harry Potter, Deathly Hallows, and Harry Potter, Deathly Hallows Part 2. That is your entire day. For this week, you got Harry Potter, you got NCIS Los Angeles.
What the fuck?
White House Down.
What?
Pompeii. You get a couple episodes of The Twilight Zone.
Okay.
If you are up at 4:30 in the morning on Tuesday. But you're going to get some more Geostorm and Demolition Man and Imaginary, Five Nights at Freddy's, Insidious, The Exorcist, 2012, Sharknado, Resident Evil Apocalypse, Megan.
I mean, some of those things, I get it.
Sure.
But
essentially, it has become, what does our studio own? Let's show those films, even if they are not related as much to the Sci-Fi Network anymore. And what we have, we have NCIS Los Angeles, so let's throw that on there.
Jesus
really,
Christ.
Other than just a place to find, hop in somewhere in a Harry Potter movie or one of these horror franchises, you get a Twilight episode. That's it. That's the only sci-fi thing there is.
Yeah, it feels like AI programmed the Sci-Fi Channel at this point. It's so dumb and so poorly done.
It's no longer a venue for truly showing science fiction properties. It is now just a place to farm the content that they have again and again and again.
To quote Caprica. Well, no, Blood and Chrome.
This has all happened before, and it will happen again and again.
And again.
Which is why we don't really talk about the Sci-Fi Network.
I actually had a listener reach out to me the other day. They were like, I'm glad you put this out because I didn't know the Sci-Fi Channel still exists.
Yeah.
There it is, right there. That's the long and short of it.
If you look at Sci-Fi current shows on their website, they have Resident Alien, which I don't believe started on the Sci-Fi Network.
Nope.
And Revival, that I have never heard of. maybe it's okay. I don't know.
Couldn't tell you.
I'd have to watch the Sci-Fi Network to find out. And then you just have reality shows. Cosplay Melee, Face Off, Game Face, and then The Ark, Astrid and Lily Save the World, some horror properties, A Paranormal Witness, or Reginald the Vampire.
There is a balance you could strike between showing old sci-fi stuff and maybe reality, maybe that kind of thing. Maybe you could find a balance to where it would still feel like the Sci-Fi Channel. But their priorities are no longer about the spirit of the network as intended. It's not the point anymore. And what they consider to be sci-fi or whatever very obviously doesn't fit into that advisory panel that they created with Asimov and Roddenberry. It's very much... The Sci-Fi Channel was always cheap because they started with nothing and showed old sci-fi. So this show was already in syndication. They just picked it up. They didn't create anything whole cloth. But then when they did, other than a few amazing highlights, was worthless. And it's blurred the lines of what sci-fi fans want, or at least what they're getting. So it's a sad devolution of what was once a promising idea. And I think we just kind of wanted to highlight the stuff that was great when it came out.
Yeah, or that it provided a vehicle that you weren't going to get anywhere else. I mean, if it wasn't for the Sci-Fi Network, Lex wouldn't have been on the air.
Yep. Farscape.
Garth Marenghi.
Battlestar.
Farscape. Even if you like, I'm not a Stargate fan, so, I'm not the person to ask, but, I mean, sci-fi was a place for Stargate to have a home and really become a juggernaut in the sci-fi field.
Yeah, wasn't it like...
But it's no longer that.
Wasn't it Stargate when it went into 10 seasons, it became the longest-running consecutive sci-fi show on TV? It was either Stargate or Stargate Atlantis.
I believe SG-1 holds the record of having broadcast continuously without a hiatus for 10 seasons.
Yep.
214 episodes.
Yep. And there are fans of Stargate. We're not going to negate the fans of Stargate. I get it.
No, and I appreciate what it was. Sci-Fi Channel was a place for it to find a new home and really expand, It gave it runway to really take off from what it had done on Showtime. But it wasn't for me. It didn't push the genre forward as some other better sci-fi programs did.
Like Battlestar.
But
even Battlestar, by the end, when they wanted to continue, had to do it as a web series with blood and chrome. They didn't even give the cachet enough for the amazing ratings of that to Caprica. And so then it had to become a fucking web series, which is, by the way, very good. It's actually probably better than Caprica. But they wouldn't even put it on the network.
Again, that's the Sci-Fi Channel for you,
Yep.
And then part of the reason we did this. You see the beginnings, you see the evolution, you see the peak, the fall, the de-evolution. It's good, it's bad, it's purpose.
It's not over. It just, for some reason, it's a zombie of its own.
It is for me.
Yes, fair enough. It is a zombie, pointlessly going through programming that sometimes tangentially you could consider sci-fi. And oftentimes it's because that's already showed up on one of the parent company's other networks. And now they want to show the reruns in perpetuity.
Yep.
Fuck it. Throw it on Sci-Fi. That's our other thing we own. Let's throw it on there. The pigs will eat that slop.
If there are any pigs left, which I'm not sure there are.
Well, there are. I know some people.
But do you know anybody who's watching the Sci-Fi Channel?
No.
There we go. It had its time. It had its highlights, but it is not what it was.
Spiritually dead.
But at least we covered essentially what it was about, what it was for, and what it became. And we hope that you guys have enjoyed.
Yeah, I think we did a comprehensive smattering of shows. There are a lot of things we could have covered that we excised. I had to narrow it down to just a few. But I think we did a decent job of showing you the different variety of shows that they would have covered. That was kind of our logic and our reasoning behind it. Now, granted, there are things, obviously, that we wish we could have included, but this would have been a 40,000-part series that would never have flown with anybody, so...
I would concur. Well, we'd like to thank you all for coming on this journey through our Sci-Why FU series. And you see why we named it that way. Yeah, it fits. And we hope you enjoyed this episode about Garth. Please come back for next episode when we will be covering something completely different, but hopefully equally as fun and interesting and entertaining and enlightening.
Mm-hmm.
If you wouldn't mind rating us 5 puddins on your favorite podcast app of your choice, ideally Apple Podcasts. It's the best way for us to get heard and thus seen. We would greatly appreciate it. Again, we'd like to thank you all. Please follow us on social media and reach out if you have any thoughts, ideas, comments, love, hate, whatevers about what we do. We'd love to hear from you. And as someone who is one of the few people who has recorded more podcasts than I've listened to, we'd like to say, come with us on our next journey. But, Skip, before they become dream weavers and imagineers themselves, what should they do?
Well, fellow Voyagers, exclamation mark out there, we would like to say thank you for coming along, just like Jake said. Please make sure you have paid your tabs, cleaned up after yourselves to some sort of reasonable degree. Make sure you've tipped your wait staff, your bar staff, your DJs, your KJs, anybody to whom that applies. Make sure you support your local comic shops and retailers. And from Jake and I, we would like to say, no matter where you go, there you are.
That's it, buddy.
Why won't she be mine? I wish I was more attractive like Douglas. Still, one can only dream.
I'm a one-track lover, down a two-way lane, driving fast down the highway, must have been insane, 'cause the temperature's too high, traveling way too fast, and I knew our loving was too hot to last.
She's smooth, like ice, cold to the touch, and it isn't very nice when you left alone. Your lady treats you bad, leaves you hanging on the phone. Take off, shove your loving on the wheels, put the pedal to the floor, 'cause you're heading for the hills. Got to get away, can't take it no more. Man, you don't need this, leave her at the door. The door, the door, the door, the door, the door.